Welcome to Le Weekend, your essential roundup of French news on culture, business, the economy, and current affairs. We bring you a convenient way to catch up on the stories from the past week in France, plus an additional focus feature blending reportage and cultural context. These are the headlines on Monday, January 5th. France and Britain's air forces conducted a joint operation on Saturday evening to bomb a suspected underground arms cache previously used by the Islamic State group in Syria, according to Britain's Defense Ministry, as reported by Reuters. France plans to ban children under 15 from social media sites and to prohibit mobile phones in high schools from September 2026 in a measure that underscores rising public concern over the impact of online harms on minors, as reported by Reuters. The Minister of Economy, Ronald Lescure, wants to reintroduce the tax on large companies. Lescure said that this is a necessary step to reach a compromise and get the bill adopted. The measure is expected to generate 6 billion euros, as reported by Le Figaro. A Paris court found 10 people guilty of cyber harassing Brigitte Macron. One person was jailed and 8 were given suspended prison sentences for posting numerous malicious comments falsely claiming that President Emmanuel Macron's wife was born a man, as reported by Le Monde. France launched a new tribunal to fight organized crime and drug trafficking networks. The measure is part of an ongoing fight against crime and drug trafficking, which has claimed an increasing number of victims in France, as reported by RFI. Epiphany was celebrated last Sunday all over France, both in the liturgical calendar and the traditional social gatherings over the Galette de Roi pastry, as reported by France 24. Heavy snowfall brought record traffic jams in the Île-de-France region, with over 1,000 kilometers of congestion, while the Paris region was under orange alert, as reported by HuffPost. French doctors began a 10-day strike over the new budget. France's health minister warned requisitions could be used as self-employed doctors and specialists launched a 10-day strike to protest measures in the 2026 Social Security budget. Unions predicted the movement will be widely followed, as reported by RFI. The exceptionally snowy Christmas and New Year period in the Alpes-Maritimes department, where about 1 meter of snowfall in the Mercantour Mountains allowed Isola 2000, Oron and Valberg to open almost all pistes and ski lifts, and record visitor numbers not seen for years, with up to 7,500 skiers in a single day and a 36% rise at Valberg. Operators combine this natural snow with artificial production, hoping to extend the season to mid-April, and also anticipate a new Club Med opening in Isola by 2029, as reported by Le Figaro. These are the headlines on Tuesday, January 6th. French preliminary inflation came in at 0.7% in December. French consumer prices rose slightly less than expected, according to preliminary data from statistics agency ANSEE, as reported by Reuters. US and European allies met in Paris mainly to discuss Ukraine's ceasefire guarantees. The US signaled it could lead ceasefire monitoring if a peace deal with Russia is reached, as reported by Le Monde. The headlines for Wednesday, January 7th. Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said France is working with partners on a plan over how to respond should the United States act on its threat to take over Greenland, as reported by Reuters. France officially banned food imports containing traces of 5 pesticides that are already banned in the European Union. The move aims to reduce farmers' opposition to the Mercosur trade deal with 4 South American countries, as reported by RFI. Heavy snowfall caused the cancellation of 40% of flights at Paris's Roissy-Charles de Gaulle airport on Wednesday morning, as reported by Les Échos. France's aerospace industry expressed concern over the weaponization of global supply chains as major powers pursue their geopolitical agendas and warned that rare earths remained a pressure point despite a US-China trade truce, as reported by Reuters. The headlines for Thursday, January 8th. French farmers defied a government ban today, blockading roads into Paris and several of the city's landmarks to protest against the Mercosur trade deal the European Union is expected to sign on Friday with South American nations, as reported by RFI. French judges expressed alarm at rumors published by German magazine Der Spiegel of potential U.S. sanctions against 3 French magistrates. The judges in question sentenced far-right candidate Marine Le Pen on March 31, 2025, to 4 years in prison, including 2 mandatory years and 5 years of ineligibility to run for elections for embezzlement of public funds, as reported by Le Monde. Cows will be absent from the emblematic Paris International Agricultural Show and competitions due to a decision by breeding organizations due to the bovine dermatosis disease, but organizers are still hoping for a limited and symbolic presence of cattle despite the epidemic, as reported by Le Figaro. The headlines for Friday, January 9th. French opposition parties seek to topple the government over the Mercosur deal. The French government was pilloried by political rivals and farmers after it failed to block the approval of the European Union's Mercosur trade deal at a vote on Friday, with far-right and far-left opposition parties filing no-confidence motions, as reported by RFI. France enjoyed another banner year for tourism, buoyed by campgrounds and international visitors. The sector, which accounts for 8% of the country's gross domestic product, continued to grow in 2025, particularly in Paris, along the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts, and in the mountains, as reported by Le Monde. New French studies linked common food preservatives with higher cancer and diabetes risks. Common food preservatives such as nitrates and sorbates may be linked to a slightly higher risk of certain cancers or type 2 diabetes, according to 2 new studies coming out of an ongoing large-scale research project on the French diet. The studies, which are based on the health data of more than 100,000 French adults, highlighted risks related to specific additives which are often used to cure ham, bacon, and sausages, as reported by RFI. Love is Blind France contestants are suing over inhuman or degrading treatment during filming. 3 participants in the French version of Netflix's reality TV show have brought their case before a Paris Region Labor Court, claiming they were deprived of their personal freedoms during the filming of the show, as reported by Le Monde. You are listening to Le Weekend. And now that you're all caught up with the main headlines from the past week, it's time for our focus story. Today we look at why tractors in Paris made the news this week. On Thursday morning, dozens of angry farmers demonstrated in front of France's lower house of parliament after driving about 100 tractors into Paris to protest the European Union's intention to move forward with a free trade deal with 4 South American nations. Despite a ban issued by authorities, farmers from all corners of the country, including at least one representative from the island of Corsica, made their way into the capital, parking their tractors at iconic landmarks including the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. The scene was striking. Around 100 tractors were parked across the capital in iconic locations, with some protesters attempting to reach the National Assembly building. When the head of the Assemblée, Yael Braun-Pivet, went to meet with protesters outside the building, he was pelted with snow and met with shouts of "Démission," resign. The depth of the farmers' frustrations became clear. This latest protest was organized by Coordination Rurale Union, which has links to the far right and represents just the newest chapter in a story that has been unfolding across France for years. But to understand why French farmers are once again taking to the streets, we need to examine both the immediate trigger and the deeper undercurrents of discontent flowing through the sector. To understand the intensity of these protests, it's essential to grasp how deeply agriculture is woven into French cultural identity. Terroir, the concept that ties a product's unique character to the specific soil, climate, and human traditions of its place of origin, is deeply ingrained in French culture. When farmers lose their ability to work the land, the French fear the loss of centuries of tradition, flavor, and cultural identity. Agriculture is an essential element of the country's heritage, so fundamental that France successfully lobbied UNESCO to recognize its gastronomic tradition as World Intangible Cultural Heritage. In addition, France's strict classification system of Appellation d'origine contrôlée, AOC, regulates the production of certain foods and wines, ensuring that products like Roquefort cheese or Champagne can only come from specific regions, protecting both quality and cultural legacy. Terroir is linked to the identity of communities, their livelihoods, and their historical relationship with the land. So when farmers see their way of life threatened by trade agreements that allow imports produced under different standards, they are fighting for something beyond economics alone. Let's first look at the Mercosur trigger. At the heart of the January protests lies opposition to the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. French farmers for years have denounced the trade deal between the Mercosur nations of Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, arguing that it would hurt French farmers' livelihoods. The deal itself is massive in scope. The deal with the Mercosur partners will create the world's biggest free trade zone, covering a market of over 700 million consumers. According to the European Commission, the free trade agreement would be the EU's biggest in terms of tariff reduction, removing 4 billion euros, approximately 4.6 billion US dollars, of duties on its exports such as car parts, dairy products, and wines. For the European industry and many agricultural exporters, this represents an enormous opportunity. The agreement will open new and meaningful trade and investment opportunities, removing tariffs on over 91% of EU goods, including the progressive elimination of Mercosur tariff peaks of 35% for many sectors. But French farmers see something very different, an existential threat. The agreement includes provisions allowing 99,000 tons of Mercosur beef to enter the European market with a 7.5% duty, along with quotas for poultry, sugar, and other products. While EU officials insist these quotas are limited, the beef quota represents 1.5% of total European beef production and is less than half of the current imports from Mercosur, which are at 206,000 tons in 2024. French farmers remained unswayed. Farmers expressed their core concerns around production standards. French Agriculture Minister Annie Genevard reaffirmed France's opposition on Wednesday, saying the agreement threatens beef, chicken, sugar, ethanol, and honey production. Farmers argue they're being undercut by imports produced under less stringent environmental and animal welfare regulations than those required in France. While France led opposition efforts, it was outvoted in Council when a qualified majority of member states backed the Mercosur agreement on Friday, ending more than 2 decades of difficult negotiations between the European Commission and the group of Latin American countries. The vote represented a significant defeat for French efforts, with France, Poland, Austria, Hungary, and Ireland voting against, while Belgium abstained. Germany, Spain, Italy, and the remaining 18 EU states supported the deal. A further trigger is the lumpy skin disease crisis. Running parallel to trade concerns is anger of the government's response to lumpy skin disease, a viral infection affecting cattle that has become another flashpoint in the relationship between farmers and authorities. In June 2025, France recorded the first outbreak of lumpy skin disease in a dairy cattle establishment in Savoie, after observing clinical signs in several animals, including nodules, fever, swelling, and milk production drop. The disease, which is not transmissible to humans, whether through contact with sick animals through food or insect bites, spread rapidly across southwestern France. By mid-December, 109 outbreaks had been identified nationwide across 10 departments, the highest concentrations in Haute-Savoie and Savoie, followed by Pyrénées-Orientales and the Jura. The government's response has been controversial. To contain the spread, authorities adopted a strict policy, culling every herd where an infection was detected, combined with movement restrictions and vaccinations. This approach, mandated by EU regulations that classify lumpy skin disease as a Category A threat requiring immediate eradication, provoked intense opposition from some farming unions. When the culling of the 200-cow herd in the Ariège finally began, after police had intervened the previous evening to remove several hundred protesters, farmers argued that the systematic destruction of entire herds, including healthy animals, is economically devastating. As one protester told France 24, "You can't build up a herd in 5 minutes. It's a lifetime of work spanning several generations." The government committed to vaccinate 1 million heads of cattle in the coming weeks against the disease, even though the culling policy remained in place for infected herds. The latest actions follow a pattern of protests. The January tractor protests in Paris are the latest manifestation of a movement that has been building for years. French farmers have repeatedly taken to the streets and roads to voice their grievances. Already in January 2024, protests and road blockages organized by both non-unionized farmers and agricultural unions protested against low food prices, proposed reductions in state subsidies for farmers' diesel fuel, and the EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement. At the time, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said there were 10,000 protesting farmers on French highways blocking 100 spots on major roads. The government responded with concessions, with the Prime Minister announcing measures that led to the lifting of most blockades by early February. But the underlying tensions never fully disappeared. The farmers returned, and dozens of tractors drove peacefully into Paris, carrying flags from Coordination Rurale. In June 2024, French farmers joined Spanish counterparts to help block crossing points along the Spanish-French border across the length of the Pyrenees from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. By November, the movement started again to dissuade the French government from joining the free trade agreement with Mercosur. In July of the same year, 30,000 wine growers gathered in the southern town of Béziers, parking their tractors in a protest inaugurating a summer of 300 to 500 barricades across France, establishing the tractor blockade as a symbol of agricultural revolt. French farmers' actions are part of a broader protest movement in Europe against EU agriculture policies, bureaucracy, and overall business conditions. During the 2024 protests, thousands of farmers from Europe gathered in Brussels, clogging the streets with 1,300 tractors, with similar demonstrations occurring in Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Romania, and Belgium. Farmers argue that the EU's environmental policies, which call for limits on the use of chemicals and on greenhouse gas emissions, limit their business and make their products more expensive than non-EU imports. France has seen a dramatic transformation of its agricultural sector over the past decades. France's farming population went from 7 million in 1946 to fewer than 3 million in 1974 as agriculture industrialized and consolidated. Today, French farmers operate in a complex environment of tight profit margins, strict regulations, and intense competition. Many express frustration with what they see as a disconnect between government policies and the realities of farming. The EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which provides subsidies to farmers, comes with strings attached that some farmers find onerous. For example, farmers have complained about a new requirement to leave 4% of farmland fallow, which they say reduces productive capacity without providing commensurate benefits. The EU approval of the Mercosur deal this week sets the stage for further confrontation. A signature ceremony between the EU and the Mercosur countries is expected to take place on January 17th in Asunción, Paraguay. However, the deal still requires approval from the European Parliament before entering into force. French opponents of the agreement are now pinning their hopes on blocking the deal in Parliament. Among Ireland's 14 members of Parliament, only one so far will vote for the deal, with most Irish representatives joining French colleagues in opposition. The convergence of the Mercosur controversy with the lumpy skin disease crisis has created what some observers describe as a perfect storm. The tractors rolling through Paris symbolize a broader struggle over the future of European agriculture, who will farm, how they will farm, and whether small and medium-sized operations can survive in an increasingly globalized and regulated agricultural economy. Questions that are likely to fuel tensions for some time to come. Thank you for listening to Le Weekend, your one-stop destination for the main headlines in France. Catch our weekly roundup every weekend wherever you get your podcasts. Stay informed.